Well, welcome to everyone. Can you hear me? I don't think I need to use this because it's not working. So as you know, you're here this afternoon to hear the Alumni Career Panel, Globalizing Pathways. And before I introduce the 5 Colby alums who are representing French, German, Italian, Japanese, and Russian, who will all talk about the role that the acquisition of a foreign language has played in their career path, and also suggest tangible ways for those of you who are now involved in foreign language study and global studies to develop your engagement beyond the classroom. I wanted to extend a few thanks. First of all, to Laura Meader, who's standing at the door. Laura is from Alumni Relations, and this is the 3rd panel that she has helped to organize. She has a very strong commitment to this, and without her, we wouldn't be here. So thank you so much, Laura. I'd also like to thank the members of the core organizing committee, Elisa Johnson from Career Resources, I'm not sure. I think she's traveling today. Arnie Koch, who has recovered from a virus and is here. Thank you for being here. Patrice Franco, who is recovering from surgery and cannot be here. And my colleague Gianluca Rizzo in Italian. Thank you so much for your help. So I'm just going to give you a brief bio of the panelists, and then they will take over from there. They plan to speak about 8 to 10 minutes. If you are timing them and you are thinking they're going over those 10 minutes, please stand up and wave like this, and we will, you'll speak as long as you wish. Eileen Evans will be our first speaker this afternoon. After her graduation from Colby in 2012, Eileen took off for France to teach in a high school in Arles. As she established relationships with people in the community, she was able to propose an English program at a local private elementary school to begin the following school year. She taught then at this school during her 2nd year in France, while contemplating graduate school programs in international education. She is now in California pursuing a joint master's degree in international education. She's at the International Education Management and Public Administration. She's doing the International, Education Management and Public Administration program at the Monterey Institute of International Studies. I have no excuse, I'm not jet lagged, but Eileen might be. Our second speaker is Kenny Flynn. Good afternoon. As a biology major and Japanese language minor at Colby, Kenny held an internship at the Tsukuba University Genetics Research Center in Tsukuba, Japan during the Jan-Plan term, where he was able to combine both his interests in language and scientific research. Kenny was also the first place recipient for his essay entitled The Future of Japan and the U.S. to the Japanese Consulate of Boston 2009 essay contest. For the advanced division. Since leaving Colby, Kenny has received his master's and his PhD in microbiology at the University of New Hampshire, where he is now continuing to work as a postdoctoral research scholar. He is also the co-founder of the science blog feedthedatamonster.com, his intent being to improve how science is communicated. Andrew Lowson, our 3rd speaker, graduated from Colby in 2006 with a BA in Russian. From 2006 to 2008, he participated in the national flagship Russian program, studying advanced Russian at the University of Maryland and St. Petersburg State University. He worked as an editor for the Prime Tass news agency in Moscow before returning home in 2010 to join the U.S. State Department's Office of WMD Terrorism, where he focused on bilateral efforts to combat nuclear smuggling in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. He is currently pursuing a master's degree from Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, focusing on anti-corruption reforms in the former Soviet Union. There are some seats here in the front if some of you are standing wish to be seated. That's fine. Our 4th speaker is Carter Stevens, who graduated in 2013 and spent, there he is. Alphabetical order doesn't, we've changed it, so it really doesn't matter. It's the afternoon and it's a cold afternoon. Okay, let me do that again. Carter Stevens, who is out of alphabetical order, but we will follow this order of speaking. Graduated in 2013 and spent the summer working for a political campaign in Massachusetts. Then spent 10 months on a Fulbright English teaching assistantship in northwestern Germany. He worked at a high school for German college-bound students and taught English in addition to historical and cross-cultural topics, some of his favorite being the Civil War and Native Americans. He spent a lot of time traveling and meeting people during his time in Europe. He is now in law school at the American University in DC, doing a dual JD MA International Relations program. And our final speaker is Yvonne Sue Turner, who graduated from Colby in 2003 with a major in international studies, now renamed global studies, as you know, and a minor in Italian. As the senior manager for corporate resources and programs at the Points of Light Corporate Institute, Yvonne is responsible for developing the Institute's suite of resources on employee volunteerism. Previously, she served as the marketing manager for A Billion Plus Change, which was a national campaign housed and managed by Points of Light that in 2013 inspired more than 500 companies to pledge $2 billion of skill-based support to communities, the largest commitment of pro bono service in history. So with that, I turn it over to you, Eileen.
Does this work? Okay. First, I'd like to say thank you to Laura, Professor Palienko, and Audrey for inviting me here to speak. I'm delighted to be back after 2.5 years, even after taking a red eye from San Francisco last night. So please bear with me. I can't imagine not having studied French at Colby because it has had such a direct impact on my life since graduation and will continue to, I hope. This lady right here, Professor Palienko, somehow talked me into being a French major 5 years ago after I returned from Dijon my freshman year. And in all honesty, I didn't expect to continue with French at that point. But this was the best decision of my life. It allowed me to go abroad again to Senegal and to pursue my career in France afterwards. As Professor Palienko mentioned, I participated in the teaching assistant program in France, which is a program organized by the French Ministry of Education. I was living in the south of France in Arles, and I was a teaching assistant in a high school. I worked with small groups of students on oral English and in the larger classroom in collaboration with the teachers. So, as you can probably tell, knowledge of a foreign language was required for my job. My language skills also helped me develop relationships abroad within the community where I was living, and that has had the most impact on me. When I was living in Arles, I was with a host family, and with them during my first year there, I was able to create an English program in a local elementary school that started the following year in 2013. Because I got to create this program, my second year in France was so much more satisfying than the work I was doing in the high school. In my second year in France, I was contemplating what I would like to do afterwards, and I knew that I wanted to continue with French somehow, work in education, but not necessarily in teaching. So how could I do this? I looked into graduate school and realized that there's a whole field of international education that I didn't even know existed when I was at Colby. So I am now pursuing a graduate degree at the Monterey Institute of International Studies, which is a graduate school of Middlebury College, soon to be named the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. And my degree is in public administration and international education management. I've been in this program for 2 months. It's just gotten underway, but I love it. What I like most is the international focus of the school. The Monterey Institute has both the translation and interpretation program and degrees in international policy and management. And everyone at this institute speaks a foreign language, which is really unique. Upon graduation in a couple years, I hope to work in study abroad and student exchange as a means of affording other people the same experiences that I've had through my time at Colby. I've already discovered that the field of international education is so broad and there are so many opportunities in this growing field. So I was also asked to talk about tangible ways you as students could use your language as you look for jobs and graduate. My best advice would be to go abroad. I'm sure many of you will study abroad during your junior year, but the best thing you can do is to continue doing it after you graduate. You'll be fresh out of school looking for something different to do, and this is the best time to go. Don't be intimidated, don't feel like you have to find your dream job right away, and explore your options because you may not be able to go abroad again 20 years from now. And I guess the other advice would be that you realize that you will eventually forge a path. Little did I know 2 years ago that I would be in graduate school now studying international education management, which I didn't even know existed. So ways to go abroad. I would say the best, or one of the way I know is to go teach English. There are many government-sponsored opportunities to do that, one being the teaching assistant program in France, others being through Fulbright or through the JET program in Japan, for example. I know a lot of students at the Monterey Institute that have done the JET program, and some of these programs don't even require basic knowledge of a foreign language. You can go to Japan and learn Japanese and teach English at the same time. And so it's a good opportunity to even pick up a third language. And many universities are opening branch campuses abroad and looking for English teachers. So there are other non-government sponsored opportunities as well. Another option for going abroad would be the Peace Corps, which I'm sure you all have heard about as well. And the other advice I would give is that visas can be very difficult. So going through a government-sponsored program or a program that's established is certainly a good way to go, because countries will want to sponsor you for a visa, will not want to sponsor you for a visa if a national in that country can do the same job. So doing these programs that are teaching English, for example, those are good opportunities and require English. And then other ways to go, I guess, would be graduate school. There are a lot of international graduate schools and degrees in foreign language if that's something you'd like to pursue. So I've only been at Colby for 2 years, but that's what I've been doing, and I'm going to pass it on now.
So it looks like I'm up. So this is a good volume. I guess I'm a little tend to fidget a bit, so hopefully I'm hanging around. Yeah, I'll try to keep it still. We'll see. Maybe I'll do an angle. Anyways, so yeah, thank you for inviting me as well. I wanted to talk a little bit. So I studied Japanese here for the full 4 years that I was here. Mostly my angle is going to be an indirect approach to explaining how Japanese language has influenced my career path. But since I primarily work as a scientist, I hope that my perspective is something that would benefit some of you here. In particular, I would say that learning Japanese here at Colby really helped me become a better communicator, and also really taught me the value of being able to communicate well to other people, which I think is kind of something that's hugely important, but they don't really talk about much in terms of when you're learning and studying biology, how paramount being able to communicate is going to be. So I would say that, when I was a freshman here, I started taking my biology courses and such, and I decided to take Japanese. And I definitely did not fully appreciate what I was getting myself into when I took it. Having only spoken English up to that point, I was definitely in over my head in Prindle Sense's class. And I would say that, I've always been used to a heavy workload, a lot of classes, a lot of science classes, a lot of memorization of facts, material, but learning Japanese or learning a language of any kind really kind of requires more than just simple memorization. You need to be able to listen, and I always had trouble with listening comprehension, and I have found that no matter how much memorization you did, you still have to be able to sit there and look someone in the face and find the words and get over your anxiety to do that. I would say there's really nothing quite like that feeling of frustration and anxiety when you're sitting there in front of somebody and they say something and you can't respond because you first either can't find the words to respond or you simply just didn't understand what they were trying to say to you. And so that was quite a learning experience for me in terms of kind of dealing with that. And I would say that it really kind of teaches you to be comfortable with your discomfort, which I think is a really important lesson. It's something that, if you're going to be successful in any field, any job, I think you're always going to be outside your comfort zone, whether it is your boss tells you to do something new, or you learn a new skill, or get involved in some way. You're always going to be a little outside your comfort zone. So if you can somehow learn and practice being outside your comfort zone, that's a serious benefit. And I think Japanese certainly did that for me. I'd say the Japanese department gave me ample opportunities to be uncomfortable. Between all the, just something as small as simple conversational quizzes one-on-one with the teachers, but even, we always got involved in all these, events where they'd bring us with baits and load in, and we'd have to get up on stage, and they'd give me 15 minutes to improv a skit with somebody. That was the most nerve-wracking experience I remember my freshman year. We always did pretty well, but it was definitely throwing you in the deep end, if you will. So it was pretty crazy experience, but definitely wouldn't trade it for the world in retrospect. I think after I graduated from Colby, I started pursuing and studying microbiology full-time at UNH. I guess I didn't fully appreciate that, that this experience or that feeling was going to stop as a language barrier. And I was really surprised that as I learned science and became more familiar with science, that there's really kind of a communication barrier even within English in terms of science. And so what does that mean? I guess there's kind of a phrase that if you end up pursuing an advanced degree in science, a master's or PhD, especially dissertation, where you dedicate 5+ years of your life studying a specific topic, kind of the joke or the phrase you'll hear is that you learn a whole lot about something very small or very little. And you end up learning, and basically people, for example, can spend their entire careers focusing on one single protein and a single organism. So it gets very, very specialized. And along with that comes all this special jargon, all these specialized terms. And even though I'm a microbiologist, I can come up to another microbiologist and he can say things to me that I have no idea what he's talking about. And so I was really surprised by how there's really a communication barrier in general, even when we're still just speaking English in science. And what I found is that really communication demands practice, and it's something you need to dedicate a lot of your energy to. And that's kind of something they don't teach you in school when you're learning science, is that's something you need to focus on. Occasionally you have to do class presentations or do projects as a group, but I think that need or that demand is really kind of not emphasized very much. But it's hugely important. And I think that I actually got the advantage to go abroad. I wish that I had spent more time over there, and hopefully I'll get to spend more time in the future. But during my time there, I actually got to work in a microbiology lab, and it was kind of before I even decided that I really wanted to study microbiology, which was interesting. But Prima Sensei connected me with Scuba University over there, and I got to work working in this lab. And I definitely was pretty new to Japanese, didn't know a lot of Japanese yet. So I was definitely struggling with that, and also trying to get on top of the science too, because I wasn't that familiar with doing research yet. But it was quite the learning experience. But I particularly remember one time where one of the students in the lab was giving a public presentation on his work. He was presenting publicly to the rest of the department, and everyone was talking about it. He was nervous, getting prepared, And he told me about it, and I was like, oh, I'd love to go. And they were like, well, you're probably going to have trouble following along and understanding what he's talking about. And I was like, yeah, I understand, but, I'd like to go anyway. It's just, I wanted to show my support for my fellow lab mate. And so I went down there, and I was actually really surprised by how well I could follow along, even though my Japanese was pretty weak at that point. I think the point I'm trying to make is that, just because I had a basic understanding of biological terms, how to interpret graphs and data, I could actually understand a lot more about his project. I probably had a better understanding of his project after that presentation than spending several weeks talking to him about his project one-on-one. And I think that speaks to the fact that science in and of itself can almost be considered a universal language in some sense. And, as in similar to Japanese, it demands practice, and I think the skills that I learned in Japanese and my experience there kind of made me more familiar with it, and kind of taught me that it's something I should spend some time working on. And then to kind of get at the tangible side of how you can get involved in this. Rambling too much. Drink some water. I'd say, so since my experience has been mostly indirect, I would say that because of this need for better scientific communication, it really creates an opportunity for people with language skills. So I would say the main point is that English is the universal language of science. Pretty much all international scientists, maybe in their own labs and their own universities, will, present their work to each other and, engage most of their research in their native language. But ultimately, if they want to present at conferences or publish in top-tier journals, most of that is all done in English. And so there's a real need, I think, for being able to overcome that language barrier. So for them, it's a double barrier, because they have to come over the language barrier into English, and then they also have to come over that difficulty of communicating science well at the same time. And so I guess my suggestion is that, I couldn't emphasize as well as you said too, is that if you get an opportunity to do an internship that's science-oriented, those are definitely out there, you should definitely do that. But I also think it's worthwhile to get creative too with how you do that, because I think there's a real demand for scientists that have expertise in both science and English language. And I think that there's definitely opportunities there for where you could go study international lab and help them translate works into English and get involved in that way. I mean, just when I was over there, I've managed to spend some time in Switzerland. I did a couple of workshops, so there's definitely a good workshop. It's called, I don't know if anyone here is interested in evolutionary biology, but that's a great workshop. And it's in Switzerland, so you can't complain. So that's definitely worthwhile. And people come from all over the world, and it's really a great experience. But I think ultimately what I've learned in going to Japan too is that, when I was there, everyone wants my expertise because they're saying, okay, I know English pretty well, but does this sentence sound good? I mean, I spend a lot of time fine-tuning my writing for publication in scientific journals, but I have trouble with that just as a native English speaker. So, for someone to do that with not their native language, I think there's a real opportunity for people to get involved, and there's definitely career opportunities there as well. Just for example, too, a little more obscure, there's also English editing services for those types of positions where you have people who can submit writing and they need help proofreading and writing and getting promoted and such like that. And they need help. And in terms of she was saying that if I was the CEO, maybe I could offer some new job or opportunities that way to be more tangible. But unfortunately, I'm not a CEO yet. But I do run a science blog, so if you got any ideas, feel free to hit me up on that. But that's what I would say. And I think in conclusion, I would just emphasize that if you're going to take a language, I would just say don't worry so much about having that direct connection all the time. I think when I was a student, my parents, my dad especially, would give me a hard time, saying, why are you spending your time doing that? You should be focusing on your science. That's going to be the moneymaker for you eventually, which might not turn out to be true. So I think the real important thing is that you should just keep with it. If you're studying a language, even if you don't end up using Japanese, so I don't use Japanese on a daily basis, but I think I wouldn't trade that experience for the world. I think the learning experience and the ability, or the things it taught me about being a better communicator was definitely something I wouldn't trade for the world. And I value my time there. And it's definitely one of the best experiences here at Colby for sure, taking Japanese. So that would be my thoughts on that.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Lawson. I graduated from Colby in 2006. And I think I'm going to make an argument that's almost kind of the reverse of yours and how I came into Colby. Knowing that I wanted to study Russian. I joke that I watched Red Dawn one too many times when I was a kid and thought it was the greatest movie in the world. And so I always knew that I wanted to study a language, but then the next step for me was the problem. Okay, now I have a language, but what do I do? So that's for a lot of students that are in foreign language programs. This is a very useful skill. It's something that you'll take with you for the rest of your life. But sometimes it's also very hard to find the market. And so what I wanted to do with my portion of the discussion was just to talk a little bit about my path, how the language helped, and again some opportunities that are there for you both as an undergraduate student now, potentially as graduate students later, or even outside of any sort of educational program, building on what Eileen had mentioned earlier. I graduated in 2006, and it took me about 4 years before I found a really, what I thought was like fantastic, rewarding, interesting job. And it was not a very easy path. For those of you who are studying Russian, or probably I'd say Japanese, Chinese, something that's outside the typical French, German, Spanish realm where you might have language training in high school, I started Russian learning the alphabet when I was 18. And that's a huge challenge. And there's really, within the span of 4 years, you get to a level where you can just start to engage people. And so it's incredibly critical while you're at Colby to certainly make sure that you invest in your language as much as you can to try to give that everyday attention to it, to make sure you're speaking it every single day and taking a class every single semester. But in my case, I found that I needed to work on it even more. I ended up joining the National Flagship Russian program, which unfortunately no longer exists in the same way that it did when I joined. There were certainly a couple of analogous programs. But when it was December in my senior year, I was just thinking what I could do with Russian, and I found this program that I could apply for federal funding to keep learning Russian. And if I completed the program, then I would take on a service requirement with the U.S. government. And I thought, this is great. So I applied and I got in. But I didn't get funding for my first year, and so I had to continue paying out of pocket for language education. The second year was when I finally got a federal scholarship to learn Russian, and I went to St. Petersburg State University. But you can see that already, I've been learning Russian for 6 years, and I was still in class. At the end of that program, though, at the end of the 6 years, I went to the Foreign Service Institute, I took the Russian exam, and I got a 3+ out of 5, which is exactly what you're looking for when you're wanting to enter the federal workforce. Oftentimes people will leave an undergraduate program speaking a language at level, maybe Julie, maybe I'm wrong here, maybe 1+, 2, I think, 2. 2+, okay.
Russian harder than some others.
Right, so this is a 5-point system, and for the federal government, to be able to use it on a professional level, you need to make it to 3, and that is such a difficult step to get to. Once I was finally able to do that, I certainly kind of felt like I had earned my wings and felt ready for work, and I found a really interesting job at the State Department. The ways that I feel like the language really helped me in this job, well, first of all, I could conduct research in the original language, which I can't tell you how important that is. I was working on looking at classified reports, open source reports about nuclear smuggling in Central Asia and the Caucasus region, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. And there were still all of these gaps in our knowledge, which I realized you could actually plug in if you just did a simple Google search in Russian. It's amazing how much information is out there that doesn't always get translated back into the language that you're using at the office. And so all of these reports that we had compiled that were kind of missing critical pieces of information just by virtue of understanding Russian to a degree really, to that professional level, really enabled me to do that original research. I also found out I could read Bulgarian, more or less, which is unexpected, which looks like Russian is poorly spelled. But that was really, really valuable. And then I did a lot of traveling, which was just really exciting. I was 25 years old. I was a week into the job, and my boss said, come to us to Georgia, to Tbilisi. We're going to have a bilateral meeting with the Georgian government. And I was totally overwhelmed. But then while we were at those meetings, the scientific community still speaks a lot of Russian. A lot of them are trained in Soviet departments. A lot of them spent time in Moscow or in Siberia. And so the language of our workshops actually turned out to be, in large part, Russian. And what the interesting thing was, and when I felt like I really kind of earned my linguist gold star, is when I realized I could listen to the translation. The translators that we were getting were generalists. They didn't have the technical understanding, but kind of like what Kenny was saying, you can really become a technical expert, and then having the language element, having a fluency in another language, means that you can really make yourself a lot more accurate with what you're saying. And we had so many points in the conversation where the two sides just couldn't find the mutual language, and to be able to combine the technical knowledge that I have with the language, to be able to say, okay, I can improve that translation, really, really expedited things. Conducting field interviews, obviously, is a big deal, and being able to, every now and then, kind of listen in on what people are saying. They don't know you're listening. for some of us is not a bad skill. But really, it's not to be too subversive. The real important thing is that you can build relationships, like the other panelists had said. I can't tell you how quickly and how easily I was able to make contacts with people from another delegation by coming up to them and speaking to them in their language, and just engaging people and not being afraid, or being a little afraid, but still putting yourself out there and just trying to bridge that gap. I mean, that is really immeasurable. And at times, when I was traveling with a number of folks from government, I was the only person who could speak the language. I realized I could really set the pace. If it's a very interesting thing to be surrounded by people who are very advanced in their careers, who really know what they're talking about, but to be able to kind of point out areas where you think that they can improve things, and be listened to. Because you understand the cultural context, because you understand things that people are saying that don't get translated well. I don't think I could have been nearly as good as at my job as I was if I hadn't learned the language. And to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't have gotten my job if it weren't for the language either. But I was really fortunate because it did take a lot of effort beyond Colby, to really understand a critical language like Russian it takes effort. And now that I'm at Columbia, I'm in my first Russian class since 2008, and it feels really good to be back because that language is a muscle, and it does kind of deteriorate if you don't use it, but it comes back easily. What I could say is that, again, like some of the other panelists had said, do go abroad. If you are in your freshman or sophomore year, you're thinking about it for next year, I couldn't recommend more spending that entire year abroad, because the more time you spend in the country with the host family, speaking the language, your skills are getting that much better, and you're picking up on these cultural nuances that you'll be surprised when you reference them in a meeting and you don't know where that came from. But you learned it somewhere along the way when you're studying abroad. If you're about to graduate, certainly look for opportunities to continue your language study. And if you're planning on going to Washington, there's something called I think it's the Global Language Network, GLN, that offers free language classes with very good teachers, I think twice a week for free. So it's a very simple way to do it. Internships, if you still have some time before you graduate, are incredibly important. You really need to make sure you're getting out there to find that functional area of expertise that you can apply your language to. I was involved in government work. I'm interested in anti-corruption now, which became a passion of mine while I was in Russia, and got shaken down a couple of times and thought, this is really messed up. I think this is a real big problem that I want to work on. There are so many good ones out there. So do try to network, try to do those internships, and make sure that people know who you are when you're really kind of ready to enter the job force with your resume. And there are plenty of federally funded opportunities out there still. Flagship, the one that I did, unfortunately no longer exists. But the National Security Education Program has Boren Fellowships and Scholarships, which are available to you as an undergrad. I think to the tune of $20,000 with the federal service requirement. And as a graduate student, I believe they offer $30,000 with the federal service requirement again. And also, if you are thinking about what to do over the summer, maybe an internship's not your thing, maybe you'd like to learn the language, to go abroad, the critical language scholarships are available right now for you to go apply. And that's a really great thing to do. Russian, Chinese, Japanese are I think, the relevant ones for Colby. If you want to do Russian, you need 2 years, Chinese, Japanese, just 1. But it's a really great program. You spend 8 to 10 weeks in the country. So, sorry, I know it takes a long time, but it's really exciting to talk to you, and I certainly would encourage you all to continue your language studies as much as possible, and really invest in it when you're here at Colby. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Yvonne Turner, and I also wanted to just thank Laura Meter and the language departments and the global studies departments for organizing this career panel. I think I'm probably going to kind of reiterate Kenny's main points in terms of my career path and the influence that language studies at Colby played in my career path. But I minored in Italian, and after I graduated in 2003, I moved to Washington, D.C., and I got my master's in international development from American University School of International Service. And since then, I've been working in the nonprofit sector. I worked in the international development arena, and now I work for Points of Light, which is the largest organization in the world dedicated to volunteer service. And Points of Light, it's a wonderful organization. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Points of Light, but it was founded by President George H.W. Bush when he referred to 1,000 points of light in his inaugural address in 1989. He described volunteers as 1,000 points of light in a broad and peaceful sky. And so today it's the largest organization in the world that mobilizes and empowers people to make a difference in their communities through volunteer service. And there are different action networks at Points of Light, and I work for the Corporate Institute. So each action network interfaces with a different stakeholder group in society. And so we have a group called Generation On, and there are our youth service enterprise that operates out of New York, and there's AmeriCorps alums, and it's a networking group for AmeriCorps alums. We've got our Civic Accelerator, which is a startup accelerator for civic ventures, and the Corporate Institute. And so we work with companies and we help them design and implement corporate volunteer programs. And so in my role as the Senior Manager for Corporate Resources and Programs, I design our training, our corporate training content, our professional development webinars for corporate social responsibility professionals. I create our toolkits and case studies and just learning materials for CSR professionals that are wanting to improve or build corporate service programs. And I did not know that I was going to end up in this field or this job when I was at Colby, but my language studies really, as Kenny said, it really improved my ability to communicate in terms of verbal communication, written communication. And I can't overemphasize how important that is. I think that people say communication has been important, but when you get into the working world, and especially work with businesses, and especially in the nonprofit sector, being able to communicate persuasively and effectively and concisely is very, very important in terms of just being a professional, but also in management and leadership. And so learning how to learn a language and learning how to practice a language is super, super important. Studying Italian, I took 3 years of Latin before I studied Italian, but it really enriched my study abroad experience. I studied abroad in Florence in 2001, 2002, and I flew out of JFK a week before September 11th, and so I was in Florence in Italy for a week before September 11th happened, and at that point I couldn't speak the language very well, couldn't understand the language very well, and I went with the Syracuse University program, and we were all in the villa, kind of just like gathered around the TV, wanting to know what had happened. And if you watch Italian news, they speak really fast, and so I couldn't understand what was happening. All I could see was the 2 twin towers burning, and it was I think Syracuse wanted to cancel the program at one point. They decided eventually not to send us back home, but they told us to keep a low profile, which we did. And after that, it was so powerful to see all those shop owners in Italy. They wrote posters and they posted them up on their windows, and they said, "We support the American people." And there was a huge outpouring of support after September 11th, and that was just such a historic moment and a meaningful moment to me to feel like I was a citizen of the world and I was taking part in that. Being in Italy, it taught me how to communicate across cultures, how to be flexible, how to adapt, how to appreciate and respect a culture that was different from our own, which has been hugely immensely helpful in the working world. Living in Italy and just befriending a lot of Italians really helped me appreciate not only the differences in the cultures, but also the similarities across cultures. And it helped me. It was also a humbling experience. As Andrew said, learning language isn't easy. It takes practice. It's hard. But in order to learn anything, you've got to humble yourself and realize that there's a lot you don't know. There's always going to be something you don't know, and to be open to learning what you don't know. Let's see. So I would say that I definitely loved learning Italian at Colby. It enriched my study abroad experience. It helped me be a better communicator. I also want to say that it enriched my studies of international studies and global studies at Colby. I just fell in love with Italian. I learned the culture, I learned the film, I learned about the history, and it just fueled my desire to want to learn more and do better. And so because of that, I excelled academically, which helped me get into grad school and helped me get a job. And it was just a virtuous cycle. So for any of you who are sitting language, and there are naysayers that say, oh, that's impractical, don't do it. If you really are passionate about something and you just throw yourself into it, you're going to excel. And when you apply for a job, employers are going to see that, and they're going to, especially in the nonprofit sector, and you've got to have a core set of competencies and skills, but the nonprofit sector is looking for people who are passionate, who are going to take initiative, who are going to be entrepreneurial, and who are mission-oriented, and who are going to really just throw themselves into something and drive themselves forward because of their passion for the subject. Kind of jumping around here, but so learning a language fueled my studies here at Colby, but it also helps me kind of learn how to learn. And this might sound odd, but in the nonprofit sector, I've worked for organizations whose missions are to end global poverty and to help working families and improve American diplomacy and facilitate international trade. And there's not one right answer or one textbook or one report that's going to tell you the answer. There are many proposals and many different points of view, and I think that the gift of a liberal arts education is to be able to understand the issues and to be comfortable with ambiguity and to facilitate dialogue and to find common ground and move forward. And I think that's what a liberal arts education gives you. And I think that a lot of folks in the workforce aren't comfortable with that, and they want a clean, nice answer. Which in some fields you may be able to have that, but if you're dealing with really complex social and economic issues, you're gonna need to be able to learn an issue, understand problems, and try to cut through the noise and find a path forward. So I think that's definitely a gift that Colby has given me. In terms of the tangible things that you can do to complement your academic studies, folks here have mentioned internships. Definitely pursue an internship if you are able to at Colby or at grad school. It helps you gain practical skills and a network. I want to just emphasize that building a network in your field is hugely and immensely important. Happy to talk to any of you who are interested in the nonprofit sector after this. A school name and a degree name definitely looks good on a resume, but having a network is very, very important. Volunteering, and I'm not saying this just because I work for Points of Light, but volunteering can be a powerful way to build your skill sets and build your network. The Corporation for National and Community Service did research, and they showed that volunteers are 27% more likely to find a job than non-volunteers. So whether that means volunteering at your local food bank or using your skills and being a skills-based volunteer, definitely do it, because you can build your resume, you can build skills, you can make connections, and it's just benefits your community. It's great. Extracurriculars too are really important. So if you go to grad school or even here at Colby, try to find something that when I was at AU, I volunteered to work at our school as Graduate Student Journal of International Affairs called Swords and Plowshares. And so my first year I was the managing director, and then the second year I was the editor-in-chief. And it was a great exercise in organization and leadership. I got to really network with the dean's office and other students. Of course, I put it on my resume, but it was a great way to complement my academic studies in grad school. So if you have that opportunity, definitely take that up. And also, again, I'll end by saying choose your passion. Don't let what you think is practical or just because you think you're going to get a lot of money or something after college kind of guide and dictate what you study. Choose your passion, because at the end of the day, that's really going to be the only thing that drives your motivation and drives your ability to succeed.
I don't know which microphone to use here, but I think I'd like to open with a confession, and that's that when I first started doing German here at Colby, I had no intention of minoring, majoring, or doing more than the required 3 semesters of that language. And I was pretty terrified during my first semester. It was really hard to get started, and I felt pretty scared going to class. Not that my professor was terribly scary. I don't want to name any names, but maybe somebody here right now. So that sounds a lot louder. That's my confession to open with. And I was really more interested in history and government, which were the two my double majors, and then German eventually became my minor. But it really was through no organized plan. It just sort of happened. So I guess that's kind of advice if you're in that position, a student who feels a little nervous about the language, like you don't want to pursue it. Even if you feel that way now, it gets better, I guess. You might have more interest in doing it in the future. And so I kept with it until I had the opportunity to go and study abroad. And I was in Berlin for my fall semester of junior year, and I had never really been abroad before. I'd been to Canada before, but I don't think that really counts. And it was really a different experience. I lived with a host family, and I really started to experience things I had never imagined that I would. Being able to travel just on the weekend to a whole other country, being able to go and see historical sites I'd read about in books for my entire life, and just be able to walk down the street and see those. I think any of those opportunities were unique in and of themselves, and I think I'd like to focus on those unique experiences that the study abroad, the German minor, really helped me get to. And one of the key things that I really like to emphasize is the people that you meet while you're doing these programs. And I'll share a story or two. I think during this program was my host mother, and she had grown up in East Berlin for her entire life when the wall had been up, and she had always thought that she would never be able to travel to the West. She had always thought about the Colosseum in Rome as kind of a symbol of the West and a place she really wanted to visit. And when the wall finally came down, very relevant because we're celebrating the 25th anniversary, right, of the fall of the wall on November 9th, she was able to go to Rome and go to the Colosseum, and it literally brought tears to her eyes. It was an experience, and just hearing her tell me that story, I think is an experience I never would have had if I hadn't decided to pick up German as the minor. And even as I'm saying that, I'm not quite aware if I actually had the minor at that point, or if that's just something that developed after. Maybe I was paying lip service to the department in order to go and study abroad. But other things that I picked up during the study abroad experience, I don't know how to deal with this microphone. It seems to be shouting at you a lot. Was just studying a totally different culture in Germany, right? A country that is remarkably less diverse than our own country, where there are minorities, especially a fairly large Turkish population, that there's still a lot of problems with integrating into the general population that lives there. And of course, a stereotypical German, when you think of Germans, you don't necessarily think of Muslims or people who are from different countries. So that was really interesting for me to see, in addition to this traveling that I already referenced. So that was a really great experience. I came back to Colby and I was more interested in German, but it still wasn't, I guess, the huge focus. I spent a lot more time still doing history and government. But as senior year came around, I applied to the Fulbright program, and there is a different part of the Fulbright program that's English teaching assistantships, and a part that is research programs. So if you're really interested in researching something, something about German culture, one of the most obscure ones I ran into was a guy who studied rock music or heavy metal music in Stockholm. So I don't know what kind of research you do in that position, but he had a Fulbright grant to study it. So you have the opportunity to do those kind of things in addition to going and working as a teaching assistant, which is similar to what we've already talked about. So I was very fortunate to get the grant and go to Germany. And the Fulbright program in Germany is pretty much what you make of it. It was not terribly well organized. There's an overarching commission that sits in Berlin, but when you get to your actual school, it's really up to whatever you want to do. And a lot of my professors were excited to have me, but didn't really know what to do with me. So it was quite a challenge to both converse with them and to really communicate what it was I was doing there. They didn't really understand Fulbright as a postgraduate position. They thought that most of the students who were teaching assistants, especially from the UK and from European countries, were students. So they asked me what my major was, and I had to explain, well, I've actually already graduated and I'm here doing this. And that was an important thing, just establishing who I was and figuring out how to teach these lessons. And at first, a lot of the classes I would go to, the teachers would just be teaching the English class. They'd be teaching in English the whole time, right? A lot like these language classes here. And they'd ask me maybe once or twice for a clarification of something. That seemed like a really big waste of time, to be all the way over in Germany and being paid through a stipend to just be sitting there and answering only one or two questions. So I came to address and say, I don't want to interfere with the curriculum or the schedule that you have, but it would be really great if we could, either team teach these things or talk about different issues. And as mentioned earlier, I was actually able to do a lot of great lessons that touched upon things I think the students would never really have learned about. Things like the American Civil War, things like Native American populations, things that there's really a lot of stereotypes about in Germany that I think it's important to address. They have a very stereotypical view of Native Americans in general, based a lot on movies and things like that. So that was a really interesting discussion to have. And it was a really unique experience as well, being a representative of America and being forced to answer pretty much any question that people had. I remember the first class I went to, the first question, the student was very eager to ask this question. He's like, what do you think of Edward Snowden? So, you know, well, here I have to go and explain something and probably interject my own political beliefs into things. So it was very difficult to answer those questions in a way that both represented me and also the country I was coming from. But I really enjoyed those discussions, and hopefully I gave them pretty accurate answers. I guess I could have just lied to them about stuff, but hopefully I didn't. And it was really great to talk about things, everything from the government shutdown to Thanksgiving, things that really just aren't known about in German culture. They were shocked the government could just shut down. Discussing those things was a really good experience for me, and I think it really helped me to roll with the punches. I think that's one of the biggest things that studying abroad taught me, both in the school and then when you travel. And no matter how much you plan your flight, you plan your hotel or hostel where you're staying, all these details, and then inevitably everything goes wrong, right? And you need to adapt and change everything at the last minute. And you do that without being able to even call anyone, going to a country where your cell phone doesn't work and you can't access the internet, and it can be a little stressful, but it's also a lot of fun. And once you've completed that trip and you've still made it good, hopefully you've enjoyed it and you've done the things you wanted to do, it feels really good and you feel really confident about yourself after accomplishing something like that. So, and I really feel like being in the Fulbright program really allowed me to go beyond my comfort zone and explore a lot of places that I didn't have time to when I studied abroad. And also just having a year living in Germany, you see a lot more different things. And in Berlin, you didn't notice simple things about Germany, like that on Sunday, you can't really go shopping. In Berlin, you can still kind of do that because a lot of places don't close, but in the town that I was in, everything was closed. If you didn't buy your groceries by Sunday, you were going to be really hungry, or you had to go find the Turkish store to go in. So it's very interesting, especially when you also talk about religion and things like that in the classroom on that same issue, and Germans overwhelmingly believe that Americans are more religious, and in some ways, yeah, that's very true, but in other ways, you can always go shopping at the mall on Sunday, right? So it was interesting to have those conversations and say, sometimes some of these stereotypes you've heard are true, but there's different foundations to them, there's different areas to look at, and all of those discussions, I think, I greatly enjoyed, and hopefully the students understood at least, some of my words in English. So hopefully they got something out of them. But it was a really great experience, and I was very close to the teachers there. And since coming back to the U.S., now I'm in law school, but I'm doing law basically with an international focus. I'm doing a dual degree in American, where I'll eventually have a law degree and a master's degree in international affairs. So I think my language minor, even though if I kind of fought against it in the beginning, really did help me get to these things. And I'd really say 4 major points that it really gave to me. And I think the first one is the personalities and meeting people that you meet along the way. Everybody from in your hostel room, maybe the school who's from Italy that's visiting, or you have somebody who's from Canada, or anyone from all over the world that you meet along the way, and you have conversations with them about everything from the local food to politics to everything. I really love that. I love meeting people, so that was really a great experience. And I don't think that it would be possible without having the minor help me go abroad and then help me get the Fulbright for that position. It definitely, as I said, made possible absolutely unique experiences. And the word unique is used a lot, right? But it really does refer to things that are really just one of a kind. But I feel like I did have those experiences in Europe, things that couldn't possibly be replicated, and were a lot of fun, and I really learned a lot along the way. And it definitely prepared me to live outside of my comfort zone and far away from any kind of support structure. With the study abroad program, you're with the program, everybody's in the same city at least. With Fulbright, you're really pretty much by yourself. There might be a few more Americans in the program around, but you really need to get to know your teachers at school, you need to get to know your support network and make a new group of friends, and that can be a difficult task, but I really enjoyed it, and I think it was really beneficial and really helped me in developing my own personality. And yeah, the 4th point, which I already mentioned, just rolling with the punches. It is really difficult to do things without a hitch in Europe, and a lot of the times trains stop because people jump in front of them or things like that. And You know, I missed my flight once because of that, right, and to Finland, and I decided that it was still possible to take a boat to get there, right? It took 28 hours longer probably than my flight would have, but I rolled with the punches, I had a great trip, and I feel like it taught me a lot, and I learned a lot about myself along the way. So that's what I emphasize. I think the minor really helped me to develop these personal things, even if I don't really have professional applications beyond Fulbright and teaching in the school at this point in time. I'm sure it will help when I finish my degrees and am done with school finally at some point in the future. So, thank you.
We have time for questions, and if you don't ask enough of them, right now we will go upstairs for copious refreshments and drinks for the few of us who are of age. Yes.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you all. I thought what you said was terrific, and you've had such diverse experiences, and thank you especially for promoting study abroad, because I'm the director of off-campus study, Nancy Downey, and I really just wanted, for students here, I wanted you to know that if you are interested in the Boren Scholarship, which Andrew mentioned, I'm the campus representative for that, and you can go on their website and read a little bit about it, but if you're a first year or a sophomore and you're planning to go abroad as a junior, you can apply for scholarship money. The Boren is scholarship money for that. You have to relate your desire to learn language to national security, and you have to complete a service requirement after you graduate. But national security is very broadly defined, and so come and talk to me if you think that you might be able to do that. They also have a special STEM initiative, so if you're in the science, technology, engineering, math, they have a STEM initiative for summer study where you can get money to go abroad in the summer for at least 8 weeks. And there's a fellowship that you can pursue if you're a senior and you're studying languages. You can pursue a fellowship with Boren. I think it's up to $30,000. But you do have to, when you apply, you have to have already applied to graduate school. So a lot of times what happens here is seniors will come to me and be interested in it, but they have not applied to graduate school. So if you're interested, please come to Eustis 103 and we can make an appointment to talk. Also, Professor Bessio is here, and she is the representative for Gilman and Fulbright, right, Kim?
Yes.
So you have to start thinking about these things early. So I just wanted to get that in because I see it stay for the question. So thank you so much. This is excellent.
Don't be shy. Anything? Any clarifications? Please.
I have a question that is starts out with Andrew's experience at TOS, which is the big sort of AP of Russia, translating. And it occurs to me there must be a lot in media, a lot of media outlets that need that translating capacity. You were behind the scenes. What was the job? What was it like? And does anyone know about that and those opportunities in other languages?
Right, so TOS is really interesting. That was a job that I took really as an excuse to stay in Russia a little bit longer, and it was a really great experience for me. For those of you who don't know, the TOS agency is most famous for, during the Soviet days, announcing the death of spies. I mean, it's the state organ of like a state news agency, which was privatized after the fall of the Soviet Union. So one of the most fascinating things to me was just kind of seeing what kind of institutional structures and values remained, and that was an incredible experience. In part because I was able to use my language skills every single day. I found myself doing a lot more copy editing and editing than actually just raw translation. Although I did do that for internships in Russia. And that's very good practice. It's one of the biggest challenges I think in translating is when you're fresh out of language classes, trying not to be too literal, understanding how much license you have to really kind of change the text to really relay meaning, and that's that's a really good experience to kind of be in those circumstances where you're trying to figure out, well, here's what's written, and here's what I think they mean to communicate, and how do you bridge that gap? But you know, there's definitely the demand. In Russia, there was in particular the need for native English speakers for business news was huge, and I had no experience in business, really not too much of an interest until I started thinking about this job and understanding, if you can understand the business environment in Russia in particular, you will unlock so much more knowledge about that country. There's so much behind the scenes, kind of deals, power brokers, major players. So for me, I thought it was useful not only to use my language skills, but also to kind of find another way to understand a part of the country, or the political structure, which I was becoming more and more interested at that point. I was in Kiev over the summer, and that is the Kiev Post was the one news outlet that seemed to be reporting the most about the crisis and what was happening in eastern Ukraine. And some of their stringers and reporters were only 23, 24, 25. You know, some of them putting themselves in slightly dangerous positions. Others, Kiev was actually very safe. But still being adventurous enough, recognizing a need, and really offering their services, and did the world a favor, because if it weren't for that particular news outlet, I think there's a lot of reporting that would have been lost if it weren't for young people who were willing to go.
Are you hungry? Please. Should we go upstairs to eat?
It's 5:30, so we still have about 20 minutes before the school
Okay, 20 minutes, can we? Yes, please.
My response would be very different here. From my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, any of the professors, that translation interpretation has become highly professionalized these days, and I have figured that out by my graduate institution. Half the programs are translation, interpretation, and localization management. And I had never really considered this for myself. I consider myself fluent in French, but I realized that I would have to do 2 years of study to actually become a professional translator or interpreter. If you would like more information on that, I can talk to you about the programs at my school. But yeah, I don't know if anyone has a response to that comment.
To the translation comment?
Yeah, if you agree with me, or because clearly you've had experiences with it without a translation degree.
I don't work in translation. I don't think that our degree is Ben is here. Is anyone else here from the teaching staff that could speak to the
I
translation?
would just suggest that there's a difference between becoming an interpreter-translator who's marketing that as a skill, and the vast need, I think, in every country for their English language publications to come out sounding like English, which doesn't happen when native speakers oftentimes, when they're translating, because it's no fault of the native speakers, but it's a different syntax, a different presentation of language. So I'm thinking particularly in news media that it may be a less professionalized slot and more of a communicative spot. And particularly you wouldn't be relying on utter fluency in the other language. It would be your native fluency in English.
And I agree with that. The translators and interpreters at my graduate school go on to be interpreters for the UN. So that's a very different kind of professional career path than what you're referring to.
Try not to yell into this thing. Yeah, I'm going to have to look into that some more, because I'm interested to see how that applies to sciences too. I imagine sciences will work a similar way, where it's much more casual in that sense. But I think that's the point that you made too, is that there's kind of that technical aspect. If you can merge the technical expertise you have with language, that kind of opens a lot of new doors to you that wouldn't technically require specific translation or interpretation degree per se, but you could definitely find your way into certain positions that enable you to get pretty far, I think.
Well, I just wanted to give an example. We're doing a Russian to English translation course, 2-credit translation course, and the students have chosen projects in a lot of different areas. And Nate Flanders, who's over there, is a chemistry major, chemistry Russian major, and he's chosen to translate this chemistry, and I can't read it in English. I have no idea what the text is saying. So, yeah, but there has to be a niche for people who know the language and can translate those chemistry or whatever texts. One of the things I appreciated people saying here is they didn't know what they were going to be doing with that degree. And it's a hard thing to live with because your parents are saying, why are you majoring in French? Or, what are you doing in Japanese? And that it does, not always, but for people who want to go in that direction, it pans out. So thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, I just wanted to say too, I think that's a really good point because it's something I'm learning now that I'm going to say getting older. That's probably not appropriate. But I think there's something to be said about finding your specialty or pursuing your passion, as many people here said. To some extent, you can only be good at so much, but it's really when you kind of focus in on one thing, you get really good at that one really split thing. I mean, whether it's business or anything, I think that's really important, is finding your niche. And I mean, I still remember when my biology teacher here, told me that she knew this person who was obsessed with dung beetles. And you're kind of like, dung beetles? That's really weird. But then she, became so good and was so knowledgeable about dung beetles that sure enough, eventually she became the world expert on dung beetles. And then next thing you know, she's traveling all over the world to get consulting jobs for dung beetle work. Who would have ever thought that would happen? So yeah, I think the important thing is pursue your passion, and then these things kind of somehow line themselves up eventually. It's kind of odd how that works out, but I think, my experience with Japanese too is that now I'm pursuing kind of this fermentation food aspect of it. I'm hoping that maybe I can spend some more time over there and apply the knowledge I know about Japanese language in the past and try to get that muscle going again, and also use some of my microbiology knowledge to kind of merge the two together. So I think you'd be surprised sometimes how things work out.
For the students that are here, and some of you I recognize were in French 126, did you hear things that you're surprised to have heard? Connections you wouldn't have made necessarily between your beginning language study and not necessarily just, yes, Paige, please.
Well, I think even in terms of advanced language study, the connection that can be made between being able to communicate even in your native language, transferring over from the way that you've learned a foreign language. And that's a really important connection that I've noticed sometimes, but I haven't necessarily capitalized on. That's really important to point out.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Question for Corey, actually. I'm also a German minor, and I'm applying to Berlin for next spring. But this also applies to all the panelists. But what would you say while you were during your time abroad? What would you say was the best choice that you could have made that helped you the most in the long run, in terms of
Best choice.
or something that you wish you'd done more of that could have helped you more after graduate college?
Well, when you study abroad, you guys you should. It's tough because you need to balance the classes you're actually taking, right, with your ability to travel. With Fulbright, I was literally working 12 hours a week, and I never worked Mondays. So, again, you can set your own schedule, right? There's nobody checking. So I did some work. So it was easy to set your time for traveling around that. And oftentimes, or at least my teachers were totally supportive of going out and traveling. When I studied abroad, we also didn't have class on Friday because they advocated doing that. So I would say definitely taking the time to travel, not only within the country you're in, but also beyond. And if there's some place you've always wanted to see, if you've always wanted to go to Paris or Rome or something like that, do it. Because it's really quite easy to do while you're there. Even if it seems like it might be a little bit costly, it's going to be a lot less costly than when you get back, and who knows when the next chance would be. So I traveled a lot, but I would say travel more. So do it.
Oh, okay. For me, I studied in Dijon my freshman year. So I was 18, and I mean, I was young at the time, so I didn't really understand the importance of forging relationships with people in my community. I was young and wanted to make friends with the other people in my group, so we would have a group back on campus when we got here in January. And so I regret not doing more within the Dijon community. And so taking those thoughts with me junior year, I went to Senegal, where I had wonderful relationships with my host family, a host family of 9 people. And again, I was also caught in the American bubble, as we say, but the best advice I have is to branch out as much as you can and leave that American bubble and forge those relationships, because you will still be in contact with those people. Like Carter said too, I spent the last 2 years in France, and I arrived in Arles knowing absolutely nobody. So that was a very different experience than studying abroad with a group of Americans. And I'm still in contact with many people back in France. I became the goddaughter of somebody I met there after 2 years. So those relationships become so special, and that's what I've appreciated the most with my knowledge and experience in French.
I thought I might jump in with one more statement, talking about really kind of a good survival mechanism. When I was studying with the Colby Study Abroad program, I should have branched out more. And often I retreated into English because I felt so overwhelmed by everything around me. What I realized going back was that I was almost putting too much pressure on myself to kind of be an academic, to be really intelligent, and to just kind of like impress people with all this understanding of literature. Like, I wanted to read A Hero of Our Time in Russian, a short book from the 19th century, but it's from the 19th century, and so I found myself frustrated that I couldn't read this, rather thin, very well-respected novel in the original. And then I realized that's okay. I can do that in the classroom. I shouldn't be pushing myself necessarily to make these same achievements on my own time. The best thing that I did for myself was to start going to the internet cafe and playing video games in Russian, so that you can duplicate some of these pathways of you're kind of picking up the language in a way that's casual, that is not stressful. And I started reading like supermarket fiction. And that was a great idea because these are terrible writers who repeat the same metaphor over and over again. And so that's a really great way to kind of add a couple of, some richness and variety to your language at the expense of the lack of variety, perhaps, of the other authors.
And I'll just jump in. I would say when I studied abroad, I definitely took advantage of opportunities to travel outside of Italy. And I befriended the Italian language assistant who was at the time here, so that when I went abroad, she actually invited me to her house in Siena, and she introduced me to her family and her friends, and it really just enriched the whole experience because I really felt like I connected with the local community. One thing that I wish I had done better actually is I really prepared going to Italy. In terms of the language and just psychologically preparing myself to study abroad. I had no plan to come back. I knew I was going to come back, but I actually had reverse culture shock. And because I threw myself into Italy, and then when I came back, it was like suffering loss. And it was really actually very hard for me to transition back. So I would just say, think of having an exit strategy, or think of ways that you can actually make your time back at Colby really, surround yourself with friends, or take really good classes that you're excited about to make the transition easier.
So I was wondering, Ken, you said something about the importance of English in your professional field for publications.
Yep.
And Carter, we were speaking earlier just how superbly skilled Germans are in communicating in English. Well, they're not. So, this idea of globalizing pathways and the function of language in that, how important really is it for us today? Because we assume, coming from the US, or many of us assume coming from the US, that we can do this globalization just perfectly fine with handling our English skills, and that's all we need, and everybody can communicate just fine with us. How much of a role does it really play for us to know the language, and by extension what you've all sort of proven, the culture, right? I mean, it's not just the language, but the language is the avenue, the pathway into understanding people. Do you have some anecdotes that you can share, sort of on that sort of serious questions, to lighten that up a little bit?
It's a good question. I think for me, unfortunately, I didn't spend enough time over there to really appreciate that. But I think, even just, I've spent a substantial amount of time trying to practice scientific communication just among other English speakers, and the variety that you get of people's understanding or how they think about things, just within our own culture, I find wildly surprising sometimes. I think, and that's why I pursued this blogging project, as we work with a diverse group of different biologists. But even just, I think the point I'm trying to make is that I think you really only know something as well as how many different ways you can explain it to somebody else. And I think applying that to the globalization aspect, I think understanding their perspective and getting get those cultural references, being able to think about how they think, what you're trying to communicate, and basically, learning how to learn all these points that we made. I think it's just hugely important to have that context to put it in for somebody else. You really need to get outside of your headset and think, how are they perceiving what I'm saying? Similar to even these translation problems, what was that person trying to communicate to me? Not the literal. I think to some extent that's the easier side of the coin, but on the other hand, you have to think. You have to try and think how your reader or how the other person is perceiving, and that's really. I'm certainly going to be practicing that the rest of my life. I'm sure it's science, but I think culturally that's involving is definitely hugely important.
I think that Andrew referenced this when he was talking about your trip to Georgia, and just speaking to people in their language is something that automatically is a different level of respect. And at least with Germans, there's always this perception that Americans maybe are pretty uneducated about the world. They don't have really a lot of knowledge of a lot of things beyond the US. So it started in Berlin when I was there. First off, you try to speak German to someone, and then they respond to you in English. You're like, I'm trying to practice your language. Can you work with me here? But the other thing that always seemed to happen was I would always get compliments from Germans. It would be, oh, your German is very good. And I'd think, really? I don't think it's very good. I don't know if I put it up to that level. And when I was studying abroad, and I think that there was just really a whole lot of respect, thinking, here's an American who's not just visiting for the weekend or just doing these things. Obviously, Americans have been in Germany an awfully long time for many, many different reasons, business, military, and beyond that. And to be doing something where you're trying to learn more, or to even take that one little step, even using just a few words in German, I think really was a great icebreaker a lot of the times, to have more in-depth conversations. And some of the times when I would go to like trivia nights or things, different events in town, I would even speak German with the Germans, and then they would answer me in English because we both wanted to practice. And that was kind of a weird, different way of learning the language, but for me it's been much easier to listen and to hear than it is to speak, so that was actually really helpful because we could communicate with those different languages. So yeah, I think there's a big respect element to it, and I would definitely recommend that that's important. Obviously you can't learn a language everywhere you go, but whenever we were traveling, we try to learn at least a few things. I think our Russian was very bad. We didn't get very well with it, but I think it helps to really try to invest some effort into that.
Yeah, I've never met a German that doesn't speak good English, but I can tell you that in France that is not the case whatsoever. So I learned that learning a language helps build intercultural communication skills. And I've talked a lot about relationships here, but that is key. Like you said, you can't have an in-depth conversation with somebody in English if they don't speak English very well. And I've also realized in my time abroad that language is implicated in culture, and culture is implicated in language, and those two things go hand in hand, and you can't separate them. So to really get down and deep in a subject, or be integrated and immersed where you're living, language is essential.
Did you find generational gaps in your communication experiences? Do you want to speak to those? Were there any funny moments? Were there difficult moments, embarrassing moments? We talked about confessionals, maybe this is the time. Can you think back to just a moment that,
Embarrassing.
well, it doesn't, not necessarily, or sweet, or tender, or memorable, or with, that language was actually really key to moving through that moment, that if you hadn't been able to communicate in, in the native tongue of the other person, wouldn't have worked out the same way.
I guess just an example of where, this was actually when we were visiting St. Petersburg, so obviously we didn't know Russian, but where it was really important was we were going to a museum, and I think every museum in St. Petersburg has an old woman who's the person in charge of it, because we rented a whole lot of the, and zero English ability, and we didn't really feel comfortable speaking German in Russia. We were a little concerned about that, so we were trying to communicate, and this woman, it seemed like she was telling us from her hand motions and what she was writing down that because we were students, we didn't have to pay to go in the museum. So we're like, okay, cool. And then we started to walk in, and she's like, no, you have to pay. So we actually understood the exact opposite of what the truth was. And it was just a very minor thing, and obviously we hadn't studied the language at all, but it is helpful, yes. It would have been helpful to understand something about what we're
So you didn't go to prison after?
Right, we didn't go to prison.
Okay,
No, we were okay.
Relief.
We paid.
I actually remember, like, one of the first days I was in Tokyo, I met up with my roommate, actually. We went over together, which was kind of nice. Have kind of a safety net, if you will. But I remember we were trying to get on the subway, and we were trying to figure out how to use a complicated system to buy a ticket, which was just hugely overwhelming. And I just remember this I don't know if he was homeless, but I remember he didn't have a lot of teeth. He was yelling at us in Japanese, and we just got really freaked out. And it was kind of that moment where I was panicking, and I was like, do I just run away, or do I try to work this out and try to? No, I just remember being so overwhelmed in that moment, just being like, I think I'm finally here. There's no turning back now. I'm stuck.
So did you run or did you stay?
I ran.
Okay.
I didn't know if he was trying to. I don't know. I didn't know what he wanted. I wasn't going to risk it.
We're glad you did.
I can share a story.
Sure.
Thanks. So I think one of the more interesting moments, the really defining moments for me in Russia was when we were celebrating Victory Day by drinking a bottle of wine on the street outside, and everyone else was doing so also. And so I didn't think it was a problem. And then lo and behold, a cop car just kind of inches up, just down the sidewalk. And I look around and no one is there anymore. Everyone's. And I remember getting in an argument with a cop saying, but well, I actually didn't really have a great argument. And he ended up demanding a bribe, and this is when I started getting a lot more interested in anti-corruption work. This is one of the formative experiences. But the bizarre thing was because I was able to speak Russian with him once kind of the transaction was done. I was in the car. He started asking me, "So where are you from? Like, what's it like there?"
Now that you paid.
Right. And then he was asking me about how the police officers are in America. And it was just the most surreal moment. That, this is the most expensive cab ride I've ever had in Moscow. And now this cop is asking me about governance. And so I don't mean to tell stories to prevent students from going. Unfortunately, these experiences added up a little bit. This is what got me interested in corruption. And you realize how often this happens over and over again. And you could kind of, every now and then, once you get to a certain point in your language, when you're doing research on these issues, the cool thing is when you find tongue-in-cheek humor and you can understand it, you could share a laugh with someone about some sort of like political humor that's related to your kind of area of interest. Like there's a number of these about cops with their magic wands that the traffic police kind of pull you over and try to escape some crime from you. So it's kind of a, you know, one of the most bizarre moments, one of the most entertaining, and I'm glad it's over.
Yvonne, do you have any?
Well, I mean, can you hear me without the mic?
Yes.
I mean, I've been thinking back. I probably don't have a funny, story, but I did live with a host mother, and she knew no English at all, and so I really had to communicate with her through my Italian. And I just formed a really meaningful relationship with her in terms of practicing my Italian. She would try to speak back in English, and at the end of the whole experience, she said, "Oh, I call her my mother Italiana, so she's my Italian mother." And after my study abroad experience, I wrote to her. I was her pen pal for 5 years, and it created a meaningful relationship.
For me, I don't know how common this experience is, but in Senegal, I was really operating on 3 levels of language because I had to learn Wolof, which is the local language in Dakar, and there are many other local languages throughout the very small country. And French was Wolof was my, I guess, first language. French was my second language, and English was my third language. And so I really had to rely on my French. I was learning Wolof in French, which was weird to start with. And I had to rely on my French, very infrequently my English, to understand Wolof. I had people say to me, "Oh, you're from France," and that made me feel very, very good about French. But in the end, I realized that my French was very, very important in this context because it is the language, the educated national language in Senegal, where English isn't. Whereas in France, I was falling back on English if I didn't know something. And so I guess one story was I was with my friends up in northern Senegal, and we were trying to get to a town called Podor, and we were in the middle of nowhere with a Peace Corps volunteer who had showed us his village or his hut, and the only way to get to this place was to hitchhike. So I didn't tell my parents, and I stood on the side of the road. Many cars came by. We thought maybe we could show the bottom of our legs because that would attract men. Oh, no. You can't show your legs in Senegal. And finally, a juice truck stopped, and we spoke French with him. Got in the back of his truck, and 20 minutes later, we were in Podor. And so my Wolof was not good, but my French was really essential in these contexts when you realize that English is not universal.
I think we can say thank you once again and probably go and eat together.